Hey, what's going on? Matthew Taman here. Listen, I hope that you're having a wonderful, a magnificent, and an incredible day. I am super excited about today because you're listening to the first episode of our podcast. So, Bright Eye Solar, we do more than install panels, we build trust. We offer custom solutions for solar, battery backup, and local support with honest guidance. No gimmicks, no pressure, just clear answers, long-term savings, and a team that's here before, during, and after your install. So if you're thinking about solar, have questions, we're here to help. Let's talk about what's best for your home or business. Make sure that you go to brighteyesolar.com to get a free consultation, or you can give us a call, 717-207-8449. My daughter was just inducted into the National Honor Society. She had, all A's. Her GPA, I think, was like a 3.98 or something like that, a 4.0. And they had a ceremony. So I don't know if you're a parent, right? But I'm sure you can relate to this. So when I go somewhere that my kids, whether they get an award or they playing sports, I'm the dad that want to support them. I want to cheer for them, but they don't like that. So when I go to public places with them, they're always telling me, Dad, shh, you're going to embarrass us. Don't say anything. Don't scream. Dad, don't scream. And the funny thing is, while I was sitting there, they always just nudge me like, Dad, please don't say nothing. But, I don't listen. So anyway, when they call her name, I was so excited, and I was just cheering for her. And it was really, really great time, So if you're a parent, I'm sure that you can relate to that. So in today's show, we have a guest that has an ocean of knowledge. This is someone that has so much experience in the solar and the renewable energy space. In just a moment, you're going to have him, go over his credentials because he knows a lot. He knows a whole lot. So, Scott, it's great to have you on the show.
Hi. Good morning, Matthew. Nice to be with you. So I am the founder and principal managing partner of DeBroff Consulting Group LLC. I'm based in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I have a local, regional, and national and international energy consulting practice where I get involved quite heavily in renewable energy project development and finance. And just some other background that might be helpful to the viewers. I have over 32 years of legal experience in the public utility regulation, energy law, and have spent almost the entirety of my professional career as an energy and utility attorney. I've had 8 years of initially of legal experience in the public utility regulation sector as an attorney and senior prosecutor with the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission early in my career, followed by 24 years in both private practice and with energy technology companies. At the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, I worked in the Office of Trial Staff and represented the Commonwealth in most of the Pennsylvania electric and natural gas restructuring cases, which started in 1997 and 1999, respectively. I left the PUC in 2000 to go into the private sector in order to become and started out as a VP of Government and Regulatory Affairs for an energy and technology company called Choose Energy, Inc., based in Boston. After working for a second energy tech company, ExoLink Corporation, based in Dallas-Fort Worth. In the same role, I then went back into private practice. Since then, just kind of generally, I built and developed local, regional, national, and as I said, international energy practice, concentrating on the intersection of energy and technology issues, and representation of cutting-edge technology companies supporting the utility industry. These issues include smart metering, demand response, energy efficiency, smart grid development, and alternative fuel vehicle project development. In addition, I was one of the first practitioners in Pennsylvania to represent clients in the oil and gas practice area, covering both the Marcellus and Utica shale issues. I've handled contract negotiations and regulatory filings for production of natural gas, building pipelines, and natural gas storage, gathering systems and interconnection issues, and interpreted wholesale natural gas agreements with natural gas distribution companies. More recently, over the last 16 years, I've developed and grown a renewable energy practice, first focusing in the mid-Atlantic right here of the U.S. and threading into projects into the Southeast, the Midwest, Texas, and the Southwest. I've worked on numerous commercial grade solar and wind projects and have worked for both solar development companies as well as solar and use customers. In the early days, I created a lot of my own transactional agreements, which were hard to find, and I did a lot of that from scratch. And over the years, have perfected many of the core transactional documents that are typically used in most renewable transactions today, starting with things like project management to-do lists, solar power purchase agreements, lease and license agreements, and operations and maintenance agreements. So pretty much the whole gambit. I've often been asked to work with solar finance partner companies in order to arrange for appropriate finance, appropriate finance agreements for renewable projects. I've worked on just a ton of energy projects in the U.S. from start to finish across many states over the years. And I've been asked sometimes to consult on a wide variety of other projects as well. Certainly over the years with the growth of the renewable area, it's really called on me to be more involved and in looking at a whole variety of different energy issues relating to solar and wind development. And even today, that those topics seem to increase rather than decrease.
I know that as a business, you're facing complex decisions in today's economy, especially regarding large investments like solar. Even with the tariffs, that's is on everyone's mind. We want to be able to help you to navigate this time. Listen, things like this happen here and there, and sometimes you can't stop them, but you can be able to position yourself in a way that you can take advantage of it. So, Scott, even with the tariffs implemented under President Trump, potential impact in solar panel cost, does solar still make sense financially for businesses today?
Sure. I think a couple things. On the idea of tariffs, first of all, a good deal of this has to do with project costs and specifically hardware costs. And so I think kind of I would split my opinion. I would say that it's still really hard and really early to tell exactly what's going to happen to specific tariffs on imports for solar, because we're still not really sure whether the president is going to do something across the board, which he seems likely to do actually today, the 2nd of April, that he's looking to sign a whole variety of tariffs across almost every country that does business with the U.S. That typically will have an impact, and it happened his last term where there were tariffs that were implemented, and some of those maybe not as severe but still important. I would say that on the side of the hardware, I mean, we're seeing a lot of technology, a lot of the solar hardware companies, the people who make panels and solar inverters, which are also something we'll talk about. Part of the hardware involved with solar fields and rooftop arrays and anything solar. Those pieces are definitely going to be impacted. But I do think that one of the things that a lot of these companies that are, based in the far west, or rather the east, in China, in a variety of other countries where solar manufacturing goes on, Germany, elsewhere, we're gonna see those companies making an effort to, and they already have, and getting a lot of hardware here ahead of the imposition of the tariffs, which there is a considerable amount of inventory of hardware, both panels, inverters, other things that are already here, and so that's a benefit. In addition, I think whatever happens, I think there's no question that we're starting to see some of these foreign companies start to invest in manufacturing here in the U.S. I think when you look at what a tariff is and how what the relevance of it is, I think a lot of it is what it's being used for by this administration is not necessarily what it was really intended for. And the idea was to promote not only manufacturing, but manufacturing in this country. And so we've seen that over the years, even without tariffs being implemented the last time, we've seen countries with companies in the solar hardware field invest in plants here, but there have been facilities built in Georgia, out west, in the Midwest, in the Southwest. So we have seen, even in places like Indiana and Michigan. So there are all kinds of small and large companies that are manufacturing both domestically and internationally that are coming here, and that's a good thing. So that's been taking place sort of generically, and the tariffs will certainly have an impact. But I do think that there'll be some of that is going to be overcome by the fact that there is a lot of inventory here, and so we could see it a year or two or so of projects being developed and built without any impact on the hardware. I would say that the tariffs really don't have necessarily an impact on the other side, which is considerable, which is all the construction and all the other work behind the scenes and finance and so forth, and legal expenses. There are all sorts of things, and development expenses. All of those are unaffected by it. So I think there are certainly there's certainly going to be financial consequences, but a lot of that is offset by certain tax credits. Some of it, certainly the hardware will be impacted by that. But I think, you'll see prices change, but I think folks who are committed to doing it, they know what the timetable is. And so they're planning on doing things possibly sooner rather than later, or stretch things out where maybe they're planning on constructing something and decide to wait, do all the upfront work, all the construction, project development work, all the pre-construction work, all the planning work now, and then projects can certainly go 3 or 4 years until ultimately constructed. So it's very possible that that's the kind of scenario. You have a lot of development that goes on, certainly some construction, but then some time.
So would you recommend for businesses that are on the fence about going solar or waiting, what should they do?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Matthew. I think this comes up a lot, and I've listened to folks talk about this also in the vein of buying competitive energy. It's a very similar conversation with buying from an energy marketer or a natural gas marketer. Like, should I get away from the utility? Should I do something different? Because maybe I'll save money. And I think the really basic answer is, yeah, like waiting doesn't really do anything, because over the years, if you look at patterns of the costs of any type of energy, whether it's electricity or natural gas, but focusing on electricity today, the price it's kind of like the mountain, side of a mountain. It's going to go up. It's going to have troughs. It's going to go up again. It's going to have another trough. Then it's going to go up again. Prices of energy have consistently increased over the years, and I'm talking about 30, 40, 50 years. And in the energy space, particularly with electricity, a lot of the energy rate cases before public utility commissions, use what they call a 30-year weather norm, which means that they're looking at not just a year or two, but they're looking at 30 years and what the cost of energy will be over what the weather will be, and in turn, what kind of energy usage will a particular customer have, or all of the customers of a utility over that time period. And so, solar is truly a hedge against volatile energy prices. So in those places where there are peaks, over time, since pricing has consistently gone up over the years, even though there have been small troughs, the idea is really that solar will take out a percentage of the energy usage and the cost of that over time. And so if you can lock in what you're paying for a certain amount of electricity load or usage that you have every day, every hour, every minute, that means that over time you are going to be saving money. So it's a short-term investment with a long-term benefit. I think also the idea of incentives play a huge role, and I know we'll get into this in greater detail, I'm sure, in future videos and podcasts. I think the idea of incentives, they include things from on the federal side, the federal investment tax credit, which is massive. It is a 10-year window of 30% savings on projects, overall cost of projects over the next, I think it's like we're down to like 8 years instead of 10, but that's considerable. There are state programs almost in every state that have something to do with renewable development, and there are certainly things here in Pennsylvania, but there are things pretty much everywhere where I've ever done a project that are state-based programs. And then there's project depreciation. That's a consideration as well. And these are things that will improve the return on investment and certainly make it more attractive to do a renewable project.
I think another key point is that solar is a long-term investment and not just a short-term expense. So what would you say to businesses that are looking at this from the lens of, this is just a short term, it's too expensive now, instead of looking at the long-term infrastructure and investments and payoff?
Yeah, I think that oftentimes, like, with large corporations and folks that I've done business with, I've done a lot of work over the years for a number of big box retailers. And one of the things that larger retail companies look at, and a lot of commercial type customers look at is, they want to know what the benefit is to them today, but they also know that, like, for them, the longer picture is over time, what kind of savings will they have? And also, you can do things a number of different ways. You can do things, you can buy a project and own it. You can do a third party, what they call a solar power purchase agreement, where someone else, an investment company, or may own the project and sell you the power to you, the customer, and then have someone construct it for them, and then all you're buying is the electricity from that project over time, with options at the end of that contract to do a variety of different things. But those are good discussions, and those are discussions that help the bottom line. And I would say something that I usually tell everybody when they're asking me questions about short and long-term investment. One of the things that most people don't know is that the second largest cost to most major commercial and industrial customers and companies behind healthcare is the cost of their utilities. And so electricity, natural gas, water, these are all things that companies, especially companies in the manufacturing vein, large scale companies, all sorts of commercial ventures, industrial companies, the bottom line for them is they need to operate, and they need to use a lot of electricity and a lot of natural gas and water. So these are concerns that are not today and tomorrow. They are. And so long-term success is really going to be based on how do you manage those costs. And by doing solar, and particularly because of the value of how long a solar deployment would last, you're talking now with technology that can push the useful life of panels into 25, 30 years. And it's not, that may not be a sexy topic, but the idea is, if the hardware improves, which it has over time, then that's a real benefit for someone owning or buying the electricity from a solar field. So yeah, I would say it's a short-term expense, but it certainly has, long-term 25, 30-year implications to kind of mellowing out the price of the cost of electricity to an end user, to a customer.
I want you to walk us through the process if a business decides that they want to go solar. What are the steps that's involved in that?
Right. So I'm a lawyer with a good deal of experience, having spent a lot of time working with companies, say, like in the advanced metering space. So I know technology, I can speak it, but I try to kind of boil things down, because even for folks like me, it does get a little bit complicated. But essentially, what you're looking at is the solar panel is basically a collector. And so it's taking in sunlight, which are essentially photons of energy. And the photons from the sun are hitting the panels, and that creates a DC electricity. And then that DC electricity is taken by what they call solar inverters. They're sort of like little, like I basically call them, they're sort of, they're transformers. They, not in the technical sense, but in the realistic sense, where they basically transform the DC power into AC power that is then pushed back through wires connected to the panels back into an interconnection point, and that AC power is then sent directly through the wires and lines back to the utility. And that's basically the process. Is the panels and the inverters are basically consumers of the sun, and they convert the energy from DC to AC volts, and that power goes back to the grid and is credited to the customer. So that's essentially what the core hardware really does. The other thing too, one other thing to mention just on the connection is that the utility, and I may have jumped ahead a little bit, but the utility looks at that energy, and when they credit it, what they'll do is they'll give the customer will use electricity on their site, whatever they have, building or otherwise, and they'll have a bill that basically has their consumption every month, and that bill will then also be looked at in conjunction with the injection of all that solar energy during the course of the month, and then they offset. So that's called net metering, where the power that's generated by the sun that you're taking in is offsetting the energy that you're using from the utility or from an energy marketer.
I know we talked about the steps before, but let's say that a business is, willing to explore solar and they just wanted some tips. What advice would you give them?
Sure. So, I look at this is this is a great question, because the process, I think, is something that I spend a lot of time on, and it typically involves a number of steps. It's usually about 7 steps, and so typically it includes things like, at the start, there'd be an initial consultation. There'd be a chance to look at a site, determine assess a site, do some form of energy usage analysis, looking at also what spaces are available. Is there rooftop space where you can put a solar array on a roof and keep it off the ground and save real estate, or do you need to look at something that's ground-mounted system that needs land? And so that kind of analysis usually goes first. I call that's a lot of that site identification and pre-feasibility study kind of segmentation. So that's usually those are 2 stages. Then the feasibility study would come next. That's kind of included in what I just described. Then you do a really specific system design, and you'd look at and do a proposal. You would have what the solution's going to be, what the kind of hardware you're going to use, the cost breakdown. You'd include the savings, calculations of estimated savings, what those projections would be, and then then you're in the middle of the analysis and the stages, and you're going to look at how are you going to finance things. So it's financing and looking at incentives. What kind of project are you going to do? Or are you going to build it and buy it and own it? Or are you going to just buy the electricity and then somebody else is going to finance it? So all those discussions around finance, and structure, that's sort of the next phase. That does go hand in hand with all the design work, because somebody has to spend money doing it. So, typically when you're looking at the project design, you're also at this almost simultaneously considering, do I have the resources to finance it myself, or do I need to, do I just want to buy the energy, and do I want to have someone build it and finance it for me?
One of the things that we hear often from businesses, even on the residential side, as people say, oh, solar is so expensive. What would you say to a business that wants to go solar, but they have this idea that it's too expensive for them and they can't afford it?
Yeah, I think that's where in terms of the financial discussion, you look at, it's truly going to be an offset of, well, two things. One is, if you buy it, what are the incentives that will offset the cost? And so the federal investment tax credit is a big deal. It's 30% of the value of the entire system construction, all of it. And so that's a huge consideration for just the federal side. And then there are pieces of that in that federal legislation from the Inflation Reduction Act that also speak to percentages above the 30%. So it's possible that you could boost that by 5 or 10% if you build in a redevelopment zone, or you build with all USA manufactured equipment. So, there are ways to bring that up to 40 or almost 50%. So that's just the federal side of things. And then on the state side, there are programs, I would say, like, you could call some of them incentive programs, but some of them are grants or other forms of financial support, but they are extremely valuable, and they could account for, as much as 30 or 40% of certain projects. So you're talking about significantly reducing the cost of the overall project if you buy it. And then the alternative is also, if you have someone do a power purchase agreement with you where you're just buying the electricity. So there, in that case, you're setting the bar for what the price of energy will be, say over a 25 or 30 year contract. And then at a number of points in time during that 30 years or 25 years, you would have an opportunity to make it, you might buy it. You might buy the system, after a couple of years of depreciation, where the system is maybe worth a little bit less, but it's still producing extremely well. And a lot of this hardware lasts a long time. Solar panels are warranted today. Some of the most basic panels, not even the higher end type equipment, are 25 and 30-year warranties. That means that you are going to get pretty good years out of the hardware. So, I think that, being able to afford it, there are a lot of different ways to skin the cat. You can own it, you can buy the energy from it, and then decide to buy it at the end of the 25 or 30 years in a power purchase agreement. There are lots of ways to be able to take advantage of it. So I think financially, the companies, need to know what the options are to be able to really understand that.
One of the steps that you mentioned about was the permit. Now, I want you to walk us through what that looks like, and how long does it typically take for a business to get a permit before they can go solar?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, those are the latter steps. So when you're looking at you're doing your detailed design, you're starting to prepare to do construction, and you're going to see things mainly at the township and the county levels. You will have permitting that in the process of approving a project. The first thing is, even before that, is the interconnection agreement. And so you have to, anybody that constructs a project, whether it's for you or for a third party that would own it, you file what's called an interconnection application. That interconnection application is filed with the utility. The utility brings somebody out. They look at the site. They do any kind of analysis they have to do on their end. Do they need a new pole? Do they need a connection, a better connection to a substation? All sorts of questions that they may have. That process alone, just getting into the queue for that, could be 3 to 6 months to 8 months. I've seen projects that go, I've seen wind projects that have gone, solar projects that have gone almost 12 months, where a company was waiting just to get approval by the utility. So after the utility piece of it, which I consider part of the the initial permitting stuff, then you're down to the townships and municipalities, and they usually will, their flow will go with usually how, if the construction is getting ready to move, they'll typically bend a little bit, and so you could see depending on the township and the municipality, the county, you could see a wait of a couple weeks to less or more. So it just varies. It really varies on the area of the country, the county, the township. But there's usually some discussion, and then there's some review. So and certainly, like any other construction, there's regular construction type permitting that you get, and for those things, whoever's doing the construction, they're pretty up on the timing of things, and they know what else is being developed in that particular township or municipality, and they'll have a better feel for what the timing is. But yeah, at the end of the day, you could, for a project that really needed to get underway, even some of the most basic things, it could take 6 months to a year just to get past the permitting. So in a lot of ways, like I said earlier, one of the things that makes this so interesting when people are worried about the tariffs is that, kind of the implications for a project, especially a bigger project. If you're talking about something that might be over 1 megawatt, which is considered a medium to larger size project. It's not really quite large yet, but it's not necessarily utility size project. But you start getting into a 1.5, 2, 3 megawatt project. Now you're talking about a much longer time frame, a lot more hardware, a lot more construction time, and a lot more planning. So it really depends on the sophistication of the project and where you are. Essentially. And then, the stuff you asked about the monitoring and which is really the final step, is the O&M, the operations and maintenance. And, that's ongoing. So, you're at the same time that you're designing and looking at the different stages of the project being developed, you're also considering, okay, well, when the project is actually done, then how are you going to maintain it? And it really depends. If you own it, you have to figure out who's going to maintain it for you. If somebody comes out and cleans the panels once a year, or the weather gets bad, or there's a damaged panel, who's going to come out and do any kind of repair or replacement? So a lot of those decisions those are contractual discussions, and those are discussions with folks that are both the folks who are you're contracting with to build the project, but also, a customer could bring in a third party to do a lot of the O&M after the fact. So, I've seen both of those things happen, but all of that is usually kind of settled right before the project would go into service.
I know that businesses are always excited about saving money.
Right.
But what other advantages do they see in addition to saving money? Sure.
So, a couple things. So, the first thing I think that is extremely obvious to most folks is that it should be that there will be over time a direct electricity bill reduction. And what I mean by that is there will be costs and expenses that a customer who is connected to a utility, and even a customer who gets their generation from an energy marketer, they still get their transmission and distribution. And I think this is an important concept, and I want to just stop for a second and explain it. So one of the things that I typically try to explain to a customer that's interested in solar is, do you know who you're buying your energy from? And so it could be one of two different scenarios. The first is a customer, C&I, commercial industrial customer, or a residential as well. They buy their electricity from the utility, and they also will get the transmission and distribution of that utility all comes from the utility as well. And those costs and expenses you get on one bill. That's the typical, over the years, that's the relationship that a customer has to its utility. But in Pennsylvania, in 1997, electricity was deregulated, and like in a number of states across the U.S., quite a few deregulated electricity generation, and the utilities are out of the business. And in Pennsylvania, that is true, as well as other states where the utility is just the transmission distribution, the arm of the costs and expenses, and the generation is you procure it. A customer would sign a contract with an energy marketer, and that marketer would sell electricity to them, and then the transmission and distribution costs of bringing the electricity through the wires and down into the home, those costs still remain with the utility. So truly, what happens over time, the basic fundamental kind of split is that if you're generating electricity on site, the utility cannot charge you over time for the same costs and expenses to distribute the electricity that they're bringing in, the 100% of it, and charge you for it because you're generating electricity on your site. So over time, some of that transmission and distribution, particularly the distribution charge and the generation piece, go away. So you're paying for the generation by itself. That's a reduction off your bill. That's easy to understand. But the hard part is the part that it took me years of litigation when I was doing rate case work at the PUC, Public Utility Commission, that you truly understand the breakdown. But in that distribution charge, which in many cases is almost as much as the generational charges on a bill, that distribution charge includes billing and metering, customer care, a variety of other things. And those costs, because you're generating your own electricity, they naturally go away. So your bill over time, even just for the utility part of it, when you buy electricity from a marketer, will go down. And so if you're buying your own electricity from, and you're owning it, the solar, you're taking away the generation or part of it. You're buying electricity from a marketer perhaps for the rest of it, because you're going to have to buy something just as a backup. And because you're not going to necessarily generate 100% of your electricity from the solar, that's not typically the mix. And so a combination of those things, plus the fact that the costs in that distribution charge go down because you don't have to bring energy in. So the utility has to remove some of those charges. And that typically happens over somewhat of I've seen it 3-5 years, but it's certainly a couple years of time. And those costs eventually some of them go away completely, some only partially, but that brings down your overall cost of your bill. And that is relevant because then you're fixing a good chunk of your electricity costs based on the solar, and that's the advantage above just building solar and taking that generation, is all the costs and expenses that come with the other parts of the bill that the utility would normally have to do if there wasn't solar.
Now, what about incentives?
Yeah. So, and then one other thing about doing that with having solar and just the bill reduction is you're also removing all the rate fluctuations, all the increases in rates. And one of the things that we tend to see is that there are, as I said, over time, utility rates keep going up because in deregulated states and regulated states, utilities are charging more for electricity. In like Pennsylvania, where it's deregulated, they're just passing along the cost of whatever the generation is to them. But someone's raising rates here because they know that costs and expenses are going up, and it's costing them more to generate their wholesale electricity and sell it to the utility, and then the utility resells it to you, the end customer. So there's a difference in that cost, and so you're removing all of those rate fluctuations by doing solar. You're fixing the cost of your generation, even if you own it, even if you don't do a PPA, where you're just buying the electricity at a certain cost every year and every month. Some of the other things on the incentives. So some of the other things that can apply, we talked a little bit about, but one is certainly the big one is the federal investment tax credit. That's a result of the piece of legislation known as the Inflation Reduction Act. That's a 30%, like I said, base percentage of savings for an entire project cost. That also can be higher, as I described. That's a huge deal. If you're at 30 or even 40% of the cost of a project, including all the development, all the hardware, all the legal stuff, all the construction work, that's a considerable factor. If you're removing that and you're fixing the cost of your energy, then you're doing all these things together that are actually going to save you over time. The state and local incentives, a good example of that is just specifically here in Pennsylvania, there are programs both now at the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture that are pulling money, grant money and loan money from the federal government one program that's known as REAP. There's also a program that's being done through the Department of Environmental Protection. That's a program that was originated just for Pennsylvania through the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, that's known as the RISE program. That is just getting underway this year. We're not even into the application phase of that. That hasn't come out as yet. That also is a way to build generation where there are going to be savings for small, medium, and large commercial and industrial customers. So that's just the state side. And so there are other states that have other specific programs that tie into, whether it's the USDA that gives money to different states, or the EPA or other agencies. But there still is, even at a time like we're in right now, there are still pockets of dollars and cents that are being circulated to build projects. And so that's an extremely important part of it. The other part, which is a smaller component but still important, is what's known as SRECs, the Solar Renewable Energy Credits. And so SRECs are typically, if you consider, it's sort of like a stock dividend. It's for you to do in Pennsylvania, and many states, where if you're committing to doing renewable, the states are offering an incentive, a separate incentive for just doing that. And it's basically based on the amount of revenue, amount of generation that you're buying, amount of solar that you're generating as a customer. And that generates a certain amount of a percentage of a dollar percentage. And that's reflected in basically sort of like a dividend check every month to a customer. So it's a smaller benefit, but it's still a relevant one. And that the SREC value, kind of flexes up and down, but, it could be, $30 or $50 over, for every so many kilowatt hours. But the numbers have been as high as 100 some dollars, and as low as 30 or 35. But that's another component as well. So altogether, I mean, that's kind of a good rounding out of both state, federal dollars and incentives, and that really make a project extremely affordable. And even at a time like this, where we're seeing some, like we said, increase in some costs as a result of tariffs. But over the long haul, these are projects with long lives, and also with a lot of value. So I've worked on a lot of projects over the years, and usually several over the last 15, 16 years, particularly, that involve all sorts of things, from supporting environmental sustainability goals, reducing the carbon footprint. Today there's a lot of discussion about, how important is that to a company? What are the goals and objectives of a company? But I think even in times that we are in now, companies have, they're looking at a variety of things that support and benefit the environment. They have not only employees that are concerned about it, but they also have customers that are looking at things too. Customers want to know, of a particular company, want to know that you're doing something that's having an impact on the world. And so that's shouldn't be lost in the kind of the times that we're in now. And so that's something that's important. Also, marketing and brand image. Interestingly, customers and clients are also extremely driven by, what is a company doing, and what are they talking about? How are they reflecting, the kinds of things that a customer would want reflected. So, if you have a customer that's doing something, and, are they going to work with you if, you have no policy on anything? Well, they want to know what you stand for. And so branding and PR and advertising, really important about who's doing it, and do they share the same vision? So I think having, standing for something and being able to promote and market for a company is extremely important. What does that company bring to the table? Well, what do they believe in? And that still stands for something. The other thing too is employees. I think undervalued, I think, are the employees, and what is important to employees. I think sometimes we get lost in the fact that, there are, is it all always about how much I'm making and what I'm doing, and, and what is, am I doing a good job? Is that, connect to how much I make? I think, employees today are I think a whole lot more concerned about more than just the bottom line. They want to know that they work for a company that is, has a good moral compass. What are they doing? Are they doing something beneficial that would also be a good thing that would be beneficial um, to them as employees? So something that employees can buy into is a huge driver. I mean, there are lots of companies that, that look to, different, different types of programs or ideas, things that would that employees would get behind. Because I think if you have a happy, you have a happy group of employees, you probably have a successful company. If you have folks that are all constantly only worried about the money, maybe they're in the wrong place. And businesses can fail based on rise and fall based on the employees that that they hire. So that's an incredibly sort of important, but I think sometimes undervalued, piece of it. Property values, things like that. I think sometimes you forget that when you put in infrastructure or when a company does something like this, it's a major contribution to their, what they're doing and their facilities. So, like building a new building would add value to a company if they were expanding. Same is true of solar. You're talking about adding hardware and capability that's going to last 25 or 30 years or longer. So, that could benefit the people who own the company today. It could be a benefit to the people who own the company in the future if the company changes hands. It's also a, since if it's tied to the real estate and it's something that's much more permanent, like a solar array in a field or even a array on a building, these are things that that have value in in the overall scheme of what the business and the property is worth. And then finally, I think the idea of what is sort of termed the energy independence and the the idea of resilience and the energy independence of a company being able to be what is typically called a like a self-generated, on-site generation company where you're removing the focus from the grid and behind it. And we're in Pennsylvania as part of the PJM power pool, the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland power pool, in terms of the way energy is transferred between states and within states. But if you are in say we're in PP&L service territory, but you build on-site generation like a solar capability, you're now becoming you're the power centric. You're building a little generation capability for yourself and potentially something where if you have more energy than you need, there might be a way to share what you have with others, and that's another term that's called community solar. But essentially that works a lot in residential environments. But the idea of sharing electricity within an area, where you're self-generating, that gives you true energy independence. That makes makes the grid not as relevant to whether things, if there's a brownout or a blackout. If you have your own generation, you can sustain yourself, especially with battery capability backup, when the power goes down. So, being able to stay alive and stay attached and busy and working when the power is out is a really serious piece, and that is something that a lot of companies today are really looking at. Is the one key benefit is being grid centric is not necessarily a great thing. Having the on-site generation makes you your own little generation station, and so that's a very exciting option.
I'm sure that you've learned a lot today. Scott gave us some valuable information and insight. So let me just recap before we give Scott another chance to give any final words. So Scott, he talked about his experience and expertise in commercial solar, and solar remains a strong consideration despite the tariff history and economic condition. I really want to stress that point home. I think that for those businesses that you're still on the fence and you're not sure, do I go solar now or do I just wait? Scott says he's an expert. He's telling you now is the best time to go solar because again, prices are going to change, things are going to increase. But if you can seize this opportunity right now, you're going to put your business in a lot better place. And also, he talked about to understand how solar works for a business. He went over the different steps and all the process that's involved in there. I really encourage businesses to really understand how that process works. Because when you know how that process works, it's going to save you not just money, but it's going to save you so much time and unnecessary headache. And then finally, he talked about the significant financial savings and numerous co-benefits like environmental, your brand, and you can put, some extra money back in your pocket. So make sure that if you got to listen to this again, make sure that you do so. So the final question that I have for you, Scott, is this. If a business owner listening is interested, what's the best next step?
Right. So a couple thoughts. So the first is, I think, one of your questions earlier was about, the cost of things. Is it worthwhile? And I would say the best way to kind of determine that is look at your invoices. And if you don't understand them, get someone to look at them. That could be a consultant, somebody, much like me that does this on the commercial and industrial scale. But, just very basically, if you find somebody that is a reputable solar development company, somebody to get in touch with, much like Bright Eye Solar, you have someone do a study. They look at your bills. Usually there's no charges for that. So you want to look at what your costs and expenses are, bottom line. And I think that's a great case for determining, what are you spending? And then somebody can, especially a solar development company can, give you an idea in a very basic consultation. Okay, well, here's what a project like this size would cost. This would be what you would pay. This would offset the cost of what you're currently buying. I think that's usually the best way to do it. Get a real business sense of what you're spending, and then then ask for more information beyond that. Learn more about what the hardware costs, what the what business you're in. I think a lot of times, sometimes depending on the kind of business that you have, will certainly provide some kind of framework for what size system would be a good fit. So those are the kinds of things to start with. And I think too, learning a little bit more, there's also a lot of stuff, really good information on the web. In particular, there are sites, federal sites where you can see information just generically about solar. There's a U.S. site, the EIA. I think it's EIA.org. There are lots of good generic information about what it means to do solar, what a system looks like, how it's connected to the grid. So there's a lot of really good basic information out there, both on federal websites, but also private sites, and certainly, including a company like Bright Eye, they're going to look at stuff just like I described that give you an idea of what the feasibility of a project would be, what your needs are, what the benefits would be, and that's usually the best way to get started. You want to be, if I say anything that sticks, and per our discussion today, I think the most important thing is that I always seem to lead with the same sort of discussion is how much information do you have and how much education have you done? If you have a lot, get informed, be educated about it, learn more about what the value of doing a system is, understand the incentives and how they play out. Where could you benefit from something in the particular state that you're in that you may just not be aware of? I mean, a lot of these the incentives that we have in Pennsylvania, a good chunk of Pennsylnians probably don't know very much about them, but I would say, learning a lot is the best way to get started. And once you have that, then you can make some educated, good decisions, based on all of the things that we talked about.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for being part of the show today.
Appreciate it, Matthew. Thanks so much. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Well, that's all she wrote. Make sure that you're sharing this with a friend, with a colleague. Just share the link. We're going to be releasing new episodes every 2 weeks. and then eventually once per week. You know, this gives us the opportunity to really connect with you and give you the information that you need to make good decisions for your business. That is going to not just save you money, but it comes with so many perks and benefit. Make sure that you go to brighteyesolar.com to get a free consultation, or you can give us a call, 717-207-8449. Until next time, have a wonderful day.